I'd like to call the meeting to order. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Have a roll call, please.
Present.
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 Present. Present.
Councilor Nicola.
Present.
Councilor Peliquin.
Present.
Councilor Regis.
Present.
Councilor Vandal.
Present.
9 present.
Thank you. 3, consider and accept Town Council meeting minutes of Monday, January 31st. That was Thursday, January 31st, 2013.
So moved.
Second.
Abstain.
Any discussion? Counselor?
I believe there's a correction due on page 2 under the council manager's announcements with the, let's see, 1, 2, 3rd bullet down, the Polish Club. Isn't snow supposed to be cleared within 24 hours, not 7 hours?
I think actually, after the storm, I think it is, actually says 7 hours.
I thought we were 24 hours, so,
I think no longer than 24 or something.
okay, because it's pretty specific here, saying within 7, and that's, you know, I thought, anybody else got a input on that?
You could double check.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, so we don't put something in writing that, you know. Thank you, that's all.
Okay. We have one abstention. All in favor of the minutes? Okay. Thank you. Okay. 4, subcommittee reports. A, general government.
No report and no meeting scheduled, Madam Chair.
Thank you. B, DPW.
We had a meeting of the DPW subcommittee was held on Wednesday, February 6, 2013 in the Rice Conference Room. In attendance were myself, subcommittee members Council Peliquin and citizen member Mark Moran. Also in attendance were Councilor Regis, Councilor Moriarty, and DPW Director Tom Daly. And I would like to add that Jim Pioppi was excused for that meeting. I call the meeting to order at 7 p.m. Agenda item number 1, review and vote to approve the snow and ice operation agreement between the town of Southbridge and Christopher Malinowski for the 4-wheel drive pickup truck at the rate of $73 per hour, and to submit to council for ratification. Mr. Daly stated bid had been put out in the summer and we still had some empty slots. A motion was made by Council Peliquin and seconded by Mark Moran with a favorable recommendation to council to approve the snow and ice operations agreement with Christopher Malinowski for the 4-wheel drive pickup truck at the rate of $73 per hour. Vote by show of hands, all in favor, 3-0. A motion to adjourn was made by Mark Moran and seconded by Council Peliquin. Vote by show of hands, all in favor, 3-0. Meeting adjourned at 7:02 p.m. Respectfully submitted, Evelyn Rivera, recording clerk. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Counselor. C, Education and Human Services. Counselor Marcucci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No report, but I will be scheduling a meeting in the near future. I'd spoken with Mr. Clark last week, and there was some concern on the school committee's part, along with members of the council, specific to the unemployment cost for the school department and such an increase from last year to this year. So once I have those figures from Mr. Clark, I will schedule a subcommittee meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Okay, D, Planning and Development. Counselor Clements.
No minutes and no meeting scheduled at this point.
Thank you. E, Protection of Persons and Property. Counselor Langevin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A meeting of Protection of Person and Property Subcommittee was held on Tuesday, February 5th, 2013, Rice Conference Room. In attendance were Chairman Langevin, Councilor Regis, Councilor McDonald, Citizen Member Roger Cowett, Monique Manor. Also in attendance were Councilor Marcucci, Councilor Moriarty, Councilor Peliquin, Town Manager Clark, Police Chief Charette, John Fahey, Shane Woodson, Fire Chief DeFranzo, Estelle Cowett, and Gus Steves. Chairman Langevin called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. Agenda item number 1, discuss and vote to appoint 6 sergeants to serve as liquor agents effective immediately, for an indefinite period. Geraldo Avarello, Wayne Botois, Stephen Belrose, Carlos Dingy, Jose Dingy, and Michael Sullivan. Chief Charette, this appointment will give the officers more authority to cover when on patrol. This appointment is the following state regulations. A motion was made by Councilman McDonald, second by Council Regis, with a favorable recommendation to Council to approve the appointment of Geraldo Avarello, Wayne Boito, Stephen Belrose, Carlos Dingy, Jose Dingy, Michael Sullivan to serve as liquor agents effective immediately for indefinite period. Vote by show of hands. All in favor, 5-0. Agenda item number 2, discuss and vote to appropriate up to $40,000 from free cash to allow the town manager to enter into contract with the police management consultant and auditor for purpose of studying and providing recommendations as a result of a petition submitted by town council on September 6, 2012, and to submit to council for ratification. Mr. Clark gave an overview of the proposed contract. Mr. Clark stated we have the money available in free cash to cover the contract. Chief Charette stated this was a waste of money. The Inspector General said this audit was not necessary. Many concerns from the union have been addressed and solved. He said everything that has to be done was done. Council McDonald stated the Inspector General's office did not say it wasn't necessary. They said that their office did not to conduct the audit, and he felt that it was conducting the audit would be a benefit to all in getting recommendations on how to improve the department. Mr. Clark said the letter was the Inspector General said they did not see any significant concerns and therefore would not conduct an audit. Mr. Clark believed the intent of the council would be to perform an audit to see the strong and weak points in our department and see what areas could be improvement. Discussion was held on addressing issues and found from an audit. Council Regis and others said the council needs to prepare to fulfill any deficiencies found by the audit and not just shelf their recommendations. A motion was made by Councilman McDonald, second by Roger Cowett, with a favorable recommendation to council to appropriate up to $40,000 from free cash to allow the town manager to enter into contract with police management consultant and auditor for the purpose of studying and providing recommendations as a result of a petition submitted by town council on September 6, 2012. Vote by show of hands, 3-4 and 2 opposed. Councilor Regis and Ms. Manor were opposed. Agenda item number 3, discussion vote to approve the proposed marijuana addition to the bylaw section 7-302. Prohibition of intoxicating liquors, and to amend said bylaws to read prohibition of intoxicating liquors in marijuana in public places, and to submit to council for ratification. Chief Charette stated that he looked into the issue and there's no set regulations. He is asking that we adopt a moratorium to not have dispensaries in Southbridge. A motion was made by Councilman McDonald, second by Roger Cowett, with a favorable recommendation to council to approve the proposed marijuana addition to bylaw section 7-302, prohibition of intoxicating liquors, and to amend said bylaw to read prohibition of intoxicating liquors and marijuana in public places. Vote by show of hands. All in favor, 5-0. Agenda item number 4, discuss and vote appropriate $30,000 from free cash to provide training and instruction costs in the use of rifles, ammunition, purchase of vests capable of stopping a rifle bullet, and to submit to council for ratification. Chief Charette stated this is to qualify officers in the use of these items. The vests are to be in the police cars for the adding protection is needed. 5 to 7 vests will be ordered depending on funds available. A motion was made by Council McDonald, second by Council Regis, with a favorable recommendation to Council to appropriate $30,000 from free cash to provide training, instruction costs in the use of rifles, ammunition, and purchase vests capable of stopping rifle bullets. Vote by show of hands. All in favor, 5-0. Agenda item number 5, discuss and vote to enter into contract for mutual aid between the town of Southbridge and Connecticut municipalities as it is related to the fire service and to submit to council for ratification. Mr. Clark stated there are Board of Town fire departments that have made requests for mutual aid contracts for fire services. A motion was made by Council Regis, second by Council McDonald, with a favorable recommendation to council and to enter into contract with mutual aid of Connecticut municipalities as related to fire service. Vote by show of hands. All in favor, 5-0. Agenda item number 6, update on the Deputy Fire Chief. Mr. Clark said we had 2 candidates and they both withdrawn their applications. The search is again underway and we'll keep the council updated. A motion to adjourn was made by Council McDonald, second by Council Regis. Vote by show of hands. All in favor, 5-0. Meeting adjourned at 8:50. Respectfully submitted by Evelyn Rivera, recording clerk. And Madam Chair, I have nothing scheduled at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Regis?
Madam Chair, if I could have a couple of issues with the minutes. One correction and I guess a point of clarification. Under agenda item number 2, it does state the Inspector General in several places. I believe it was the Office of the State Auditor.
That's correct.
It's not the IG's office. If that could be corrected, please. It's the Office of the State Auditor. Also, just for clarification, Mr. Clark states we have money available in free cash to cover this contract. I believe Mr. Clark's comments also included the fact that if this $40,000 appropriation was approved, in addition to the $30,000 appropriation discussed in agenda item number 4, that it would bring the level of free cash below that which we have estimated for use as another financing source for our FY14 budget, that $1 million threshold. And I think it's important that his comments, the entire part of his comments, are included in the minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm asking that we have a revision made on these minutes to reflect
Those 2
those 2 items that Councilor Regis just brought up.
Thank you, Madam
Thank
Chair.
you, Councilor. Anybody else have anything on that? Okay. Moving on to Chairwoman's announcements. Couple of things. In case anybody didn't notice, we just went through a blizzard. And I'd like to commend the DPW, the Fire Department, the Police Department, all of those involved, the town manager, everybody involved in safety in this community. And I would like to especially thank the citizens of the community for heeding the no parking bans and making it much easier for the plow trucks to get through and clean up the streets in a very timely manner. From what I understand, we have had no power outages. We actually, while it's been a pain in the neck to have to get out there with your shovel, for the most part, we pretty much have weathered this storm, and not in a small part to the cooperation, from the cooperation of the citizens in Southbridge. So thank you very much to all of you. The other thing I wanted to mention was, over the weekend, we had a basketball game that was scheduled to be played up at the high school, and it had to be moved to the old high school because there was some leaking coming from the roof in the gymnasium. And contrary to some of the things I've heard, that was not a leak in the roof. We have vents on that roof, and the roof needed to be cleaned, and some of the snow got into the vents, and that's what caused the melting snow to come through onto the floor. So there is no leaking in the roof. There is no damage up there. There's no problem with the roof. It's been addressed. I know that the consigli, the contractors that did the work up there, have looked at it. The manager was right on top of that over the weekend, and it's been addressed. So I just wanted to clarify that before rumors get spread throughout the community that there's something wrong with the roof on the high school, middle school. There's nothing wrong with it. That's all I have right now. I'm going to move on to the town manager's announcements. Mr. Clark.
Public forum.
Yes. Oh, and I also wanted to mention, sorry, the agenda does not reflect that we will have, of course, citizen forum this evening. That's a typo. It's going to come after the tie and bond presentation. It will be marked as agenda item number 7D. So citizens forum will come after the presentations this evening. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Madam.
Clark?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate you making that adjustment. I'm sorry that I missed that in the preparation of the agenda.
It's okay. So did I.
I do have several announcements this evening. I did receive a public announcement from the Board of Health that due to several animal nuisance complaints that they have decided that they will enhance enforcement of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 111, specifically Section 122 and 123, in regards to various nuisance complaints such as cat issues, leash law issues, and barking issues. So the Board of Health just wanted to alert that they will be trying to enhance enforcement in those areas. Also from our Economic Development Department, we have the following announcement that seeking applicants for the Housing Rehabilitation Program. The Town of Southbridge Community Development Block Grant Program is seeking applicants for the Housing Rehabilitation Program in the Morris, Coombs Street, and Worcester Henry Street neighborhood target areas. Assistance is given in the form of deferred payment loans to owners/occupants who qualify for our income-based program. These special home improvement loans are forgiven if you retain ownership and residency for 15 years. Applicants must own their home for at least a year and have a well-established record of timely payments. If you are interested or would like to find out more information, please contact the Economic Development Office at 508-764-5402. We also do have a application and a map of the target area, so that is a generalization on those streets. Just a item of note, I did spend a couple afternoons putting together a $100,000 synthetic turf grant, and I applied to the U.S. Soccer Foundation to see if we could try to improve one of our ball fields, and that unfortunately was turned down. But just so the council's aware that sometimes in my spare moments I try to do positive things. Also, we did receive at the last council meeting a couple of concerns. One was from a resident on Everett Street, and I know I distributed this to staff at the staff meeting, and we are looking into the different concerns that were raised. Specifically in regards to irresponsible dog owners, and I know I received an email from the chief's office saying that we would make additional efforts to enforce the dog control laws in the community. We also received information from Charter. I know the chairwoman said, and I think we have been very fortunate that we were able to dodge some of the significant weather. However, if you are having issues with your Charter service, they have provided a number for folks to call into. It's 1-888-GET-CHARTER, which is 1-888-438-2427. So if you are having issues, you can have that number to call to report any problems with your service. I do wish to just kind of reiterate what the chairwoman said in regards to, I just think we did, our departments did a great job, both fire, police, and DPW, but we are truly more effective when residents do heed our concerns, and by keeping the cars off the road, we are able to make sure that we are able to keep the roads clear. And I would ask for folks to just be patient in the sidewalk clearing, and just, if you would, please do your part to help as residents need to get around. We did receive a email from our Disability Affairs Commission just saying that we need to be sensitive to folks that have disabilities, that they are able to continue to go out and travel in the community. So I would ask that folks try to keep up with the the issues regarding that. We did also receive a thank you from the library director to the DPW that we have put up a TV screen at the library that shows the timing in which the WRTA buses will be there. That service started at the tail end of January, and it was kind of a last-minute thing that we got word that they were coming to install it, and the DPW crews came over to accommodate and assist the library staff with the installation of that. And then also there was another person that had a issue, I believe it was Councilor Vandal, that had brought up a concern. I just wish to report that that individual was reached out to by our assessing department, and it is my understanding that they did have a good, healthy conversation, and I believe that that person is filing an abatement. So we did follow up on that request. And that actually concludes my comments this evening, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 7, presentations. There are no swearing in. There's no swearing in this evening, so we'll just go right to presentations. The first, my pleasure to introduce to the community the interim school superintendent, who's here this evening with us. His name is Basan Nembirkau. How's that?
Close.
Close? How is it pronounced?
It's number co.
Nemberco.
Yeah, the W is silent. When we came to this country, they played around with the alphabet, and it's slightly different as we grew up with it. So,
Well, welcome.
Buzz number co is fine.
Thank
First,
you.
I want to thank Town Council for inviting me here this evening to introduce myself formally. But before I do that, one of the most important functions that I have is to call school off in inclement weather. And this morning we had school. I got up 4:45, and Mike Como and I have been running these regular dialogues about that. And I asked him about the roads. I checked with him over the weekend. I just want to compliment and reiterate what you had said. The Public Works Department has done a spectacular job in this town, and Mike Como's crew with the maintenance, they were able to open the school. They got it open yesterday for the basketball game and so on. And by coming here, I just also want to thank Police Chief Charette, Town Manager Mr. Clark, and then his excellent financial staff down there, Ms. Fournier and Ms. Harris, Hornoy. I can pronounce French names also. And for being most gracious and working with us, because I think it's really important that the school department and the town work very closely together, because a good school system makes the town. And in this country, it's rather interesting that education is almost by zip code. You get in the right zip code, spend the right, you have a quality school system, property values go up, people value the community, and they will invest and spend more time in doing that. So I think it's really important that we work very closely together, because there are many challenges ahead. I mean, I came here on a 6-month initial contract after I had retired as superintendent in Brockton. Brockton is 18,000 students with 25 schools and a population that's minority in both languages, but also racially and ethnically, and a high free and reduced rates similar to this. Now, this community here is a small town, but it has urban issues and urban problems. I think we all have to recognize that. I was superintendent for 7 or so years in Greenfield, Massachusetts. For those of you, if you're in Boston, you wouldn't know where that is, but you people in so-called central or western Mass here have an idea. And Greenfield is also a town of about 18,000 people, 5 schools, about 2,500 students, and a population that was diversifying very rapidly. The mills had left, population changed, and people were hoping that we could go back to 1950. Well, that's never going to happen again. We have to recognize that we're in the 21st century with 21st century problems and 21st century challenges. What I found here is that there are lots of good people working very, very hard, but very little leadership, very little accountability, and very few clear goals that everybody can get behind. I always define chaos as good, well-intentioned people doing whatever they think is right. And that's what we've had. And my goal in a short time, well, actually a little bit longer now that school committee has asked me to extend, and my third retirement break, I'll be here till June of next year. Clearly that my plan to create processes, procedures, and stabilize wasn't going to be done in 6 months, and I'm not a quitter, so I decided that at my advanced age, I will continue for a while longer. But in introducing myself to you, I think it's important that you understand some of the values and a little bit about my background, so when decisions are made, you'll understand. Not calling school off today was important to me. We looked at the weather report, we could have had a 2-hour delay, and the kids would have been caught right in the middle of the storm. But more importantly, the idea of hard work, getting up in a little adversity, and showing up to do your job was very, very important. I think if we willy-nilly close schools, take days off and everything else, we develop a habit of mind, a habit of practice. That things are easy. When I was a principal many years ago, I would get calls from employers, and most people think that they will ask about grades, etc. The most important thing they ask, the first question they ask is, what was that student's attendance rate? In the real world, showing up. And I think that's really important. I've never seen a kid who had 100% attendance rate not be successful. And school for these young people is work, the training ground for their careers. So I rarely call school off. I have boots, and I recognize you guys are all tough New Englanders, and you have to face the adversity a little bit. Secondly, when I look at my calling, is I got into education for a very personal reason. I came to this country, didn't speak English, learned the language, and the American public schools became the venue for me to be successful and rose to the top of the educational ladder, so to speak. Brockton's the 4th largest school system in the Commonwealth, and when I got there, they weren't performing very well, and I made a very clear statement that we will be the highest performing of the 12 largest urban districts. And I kept saying that over and over again. They changed attitudes, values. And when I retired, we were #1 in the state. And in fact, the high school with 4,300 students is a national model. That took a lot of work of a lot of people. But critically, the school committee, myself, and the leadership kept saying, here's our goal, here's what we're going to be, here's what we strive for, not make excuses. And then that's quite easy. So, in closing, I just want to recognize the fact that we have 2 school committee members, Kara Donovan and Laura McLaughlin, who have spent countless hours holding community meetings. And I met with them to discuss their findings. And what they basically said was a lot of the community was concerned about behaviors, about discipline, unruliness, and things like that. Very rarely about quality of instruction. And so I said to them, that is basically a community issue that's transferred into the school. So I have a recommendation for the town council to consider and discuss with the school committee and other members of communities to create a task force to look at issues of the young people in this community. We have a high SPED rate, we have a high English as a second language rate, we have disenfranchisement to a certain extent by many of the students. We can't do that in 6 hours a day and 180 days a year. It has to be a total community effort. So I'm suggesting a task force, meeting with the school committee involving the police department, social service agencies, the faith-based groups in the community. That's important. Mm-hmm. And then working together to develop a plan so we can have a 365, 24/7 plan with all of us playing a very important part of it. I'd be happy to do whatever I can because some of the discipline issues we had in the last couple of weeks were activities and disagreements that were carried over from the community and played out in the school. And that becomes a situation where then people start saying, well, the schools don't have discipline, they don't do this, they don't do that. Well, I always say it's a community. There isn't just violence in school, there's violence in the community. And as an urban school system in a small town, what I always tell people is that any urban system, any system actually, will always have problems. And if you want to evaluate one of these systems, truthfully, you look at what they're doing to deal with those problems. There's always going to be some problems. And I think people neglect that. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to taking my 40-plus years of experience, and hopefully I can make a difference in this community, and I will work at it.
Have you come up with a goal for this community as you did for in Brockton?
Have I
Come up with a goal statement?
Clearly, the most important thing we can do now is to make sure that we're not a level 4 underperforming school district. You've been a level 4 underperforming school district for over 10 years, and you haven't addressed that, as I consider, as effectively, because it's been a goal, small goal, but you haven't aligned your resources to accomplish that. It's a misalignment. And when I believe very strongly in identifying your goal. Here's where you want to be. Got to find out where you are. And then looking at that gap, analyzing the gap, and developing a plan to address it. And that includes human resources, financial resources, and right on down the line, capital resources to accomplish that. So it's about alignment. And my goal is to set the goals, align the resources, measure it with timelines, and then celebrate those accomplishments, and then hopefully I have the infrastructure in place that when I leave, it'll continue.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody have anything for our superintendent right now?
Talked too long already.
Councilor McDonald?
I just want to say I'm very impressed with what I've heard. Very glad that you're here in the community. I hope we get to keep you for some time to come.
No, I'm too old. I agreed to stay a year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did you want to add something,
I
Councilor?
just wanted to note, I love the idea on the task force, and to me it's something, I don't know if what Councilor Marcucci thinks, obviously, but to me that seems like an EHS sort of thing that I think would be great to get started on sooner than later.
And we will. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Next, we have a presentation of the Optical Sculpture Perpetual Care Fund, and this presentation is given by Janina and Nancy Swyacki. Ladies.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Standing here is kind of like very, very reminiscent of once before we came before the town council. I see some of the councilors nodding their heads. They remember that. And when we came that first time, we were filled with questions. The most basic question of all was, did anyone else feel that there was a diminishing awareness of why there was that huge campus of buildings down by the Rotary? Many people had not had contact with American Optical Company and were unfamiliar with the impact that industry had here in the town of Southbridge. So many individuals spent their livelihoods working there, earning a living, and helping to make Main Street such a mecca of activity. On the other hand, the company itself became famous worldwide for the optical industry inventions that were created right here in Southbridge. So when we looked at the councilors, we said, do we want to preserve that memory? Do we want to somehow or other make that come alive again? That was way back in 2008, in December of 2008. And the councilors, hopefully, would be in agreement that evening, and they were. So we had with us a metalsmith from Woodstock, Connecticut, Michael Sari. And we also had, if some of you remember, a huge box that was decorated, and inside was a prototype of what we thought and imagined would help to instigate people to want to be interested in the history of Southbridge and American Optical and how it developed into so many of the industries that are now working in our community in fiber optics. Inside that box, that prototype held a significant idea of contemporary art that might indeed open minds to past history. And when the councilors agreed that we could have a section of the town common for that very piece of public art, we got together with our committee and began work.
Right. We had a very diverse and very capable committee that worked with us. Dick Whitney, AO historian. Donna Silverberg was our artisan. Margaret Morrissey, researcher. Lawrence Morrison, public relations. Alexandra McNett from the Chamber of Commerce was our business contact. Gabriel McCarthy, construction. Irene Garand, finances. Cassandra Ackley, town government. And our fiduciary agent, Quinnebog Valley Council for the Arts and Humanity. These were our driving forces to help us connect with workers and consultants in making the vision a reality.
And to create that vision, our first goal we knew was that we had to raise some funds. And then we were hopefully going to have 2 stages of progress. The first would be the actual construction of the site, and the second would be beautification. The fundraising actually happened quite smoothly. The big impetus at the start was the Claire Burt's Trust, which gave us a fine donation, and then we applied for 3 separate mass cultural grants and received money from all 3 applications. After that, local banks, businesses, civic groups, and of course so many individuals contributed. And before we knew it, we had the funds to proceed. And yet, along the way, we were also pleased by spontaneous offers of work from so many local workforces. Included were 2 very generous in-kind labor sources. The first, spearheaded by the deceased now Alfred DePietro and his son Mark, who now operates D&D, and secondly, Scott and Steve Lazo, with their construction and contracting abilities, helped in an in-kind fashion.
So that by October 21st, 2010, a 20-foot metal sculpture was dedicated on the town common. The festivities were hosted by the Southbridge Hotel and Conference Center with a public ceremony on the common.
At that public ceremony, there were many people involved. There were people of all ages and backgrounds, clergymen, politicians, citizens, and school children. Some of you may not know that American Optical worked in conjunction with Hollywood producer Michael Todd. He was one of Elizabeth Taylor's husbands. And Michael Todd and AO did many successful films. Part of the program included theme song from one of the famous films that Mike and AO produced together. And we also had period characters acting out during that performance. If you were unable to attend, we hope that one day you will be able to see a broadcast of that production. We heard just this evening that Paul Zotos, I think I saw him come in, is indeed preparing and working on the final editing of a tape that he will release and give to the local cable television channel. So all of you will get to see that one day. But in the meanwhile, we brought along some booklets for the counselors and anyone in the audience who might like to see some of the progress stages of this sculpture.
Our second phase was beautification, and this necessitated as much time and effort and attention as phase 1. Parquet builders stepped up and donated their services to level the ground after dedication in preparation for winter. We attended to meetings regarding lighting, landscaping, and hardscape. The results are there at the town common, and we certainly invite anybody from council, anybody from the general public who hasn't seen it to please go and take a look at it. There are over 100 engraved pavers of various sizes, identifying supporters from as far away as Texas, memorials to some long deceased, yet there are more who are listed in the dedication booklet.
This truly turned out to be a community project, and it will identify the eye of the Commonwealth long beyond our lifespans. From the start, the committee was hopeful that we could raise enough funds so that we would in the end be able to establish a fund for perpetual care of the optical sculpture site in honor of all the former AO employees. And we have presented a check to Mr. Clark in the amount of $3,924.13. And now, 4 years later, we can say to you, mission accomplished.
Okay. Ladies, you're incredible. I want to say that I recall when you came forward and you stuck with us through the whole project. You've managed to omit yourselves, which is totally like you, and I want to say bravo to you.
Would anyone like a booklet outlining?
Sure. Yes, thank you.
Can you do it?
Good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for your...
I'd like to now move on to the final presentation of the evening. That would be tie and bond. David Murphy will be presenting, and Mr. Clark has a few things he'd like to say.
Just, well, they set up to, I know they're going to do a PowerPoint presentation, so if they want to get that started. I know over the time that I've been here that very often I'm asked to kind of comment on landfill issues, and on this, Tie and Bond was contracted to do a study of some of the data, and that Mr. Jeffrey Thalen is a senior hydrogeologist, is here this evening, along with Mr. Murphy, who is a vice president of Tie and Bond. So I thought instead of having me trying to translate, I would just go directly to the source, and if there are any questions, they're here to respond to any questions as well. So I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to present.
Great. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your inviting us here. Tie and Bond, as town manager said, was contracted with the town to provide third-party services for the water quality evaluation at the landfill. I come with 28 years of landfill engineering experience, and Jeff has 25 years of as a senior hydrologist working on dozens and dozens of landfills across the Commonwealth. We have a quick PowerPoint presentation we want to go through, and I believe at your desire if we can have question and answers at the end. With that, I'll just turn it right over to Jeff.
Let's see how it fares here. We need to pull it straight out.
So we'll let that warm up for just a
Excuse
minute.
me, before you even try, I can only speak for the two of us. We cannot hear you. You need to pull that mic closer up to you. I believe that'll help. I don't know if the audience can hear you. Can you hear them? No. Okay. Let's see how that works.
Well, the presentation's on the third-party water quality evaluation we performed for the town. The state initially asked the town to look at arsenic, chromium, and lead at the landfill. We provided a scope work to the state, and they came back and they requested we also look at iron, manganese, and the volatile organic compound vinyl chloride. And so those were kind of the contaminants they wanted us to look at the landfill site over the last 5 years. And our evaluation included looking at site hydrogeology, potential sources of the metals in the VOC, fate and transport of those metals, and then some recommendations for additional monitoring. I just want to point out that the landfill has been looked at pretty extensively through both the landfill consultant and then also through Tie and Bond through third-party reviews as part of state permitting and site assignment. Landfill site, north is off to the left. Monitoring wells surround the site, and they're generally right along the facility boundaries where you see the landfill developed. This plan shows wetlands that surround the site, property boundaries of the site. Stormwater detention areas are crosshatched on the map. We looked at landfill development as part of the study, and the site was initially developed with a compacted subgrade but no plastic liner system and no leachate collection. As state regulations progressed and the landfill was developed, they added leachate collection and then the liner system you have now, which does double composite liner with leachate collection. So if we take a look at the way the landfill has been developed, those little squares there are different areas of liner development, and I think the important takeaway from this site plan is that the oldest areas are to the south, so they're on the more to the right side of the landfill. The two yellow areas off to the left side are the proposed expansion areas, so those are undeveloped at this point. And in between there you have different phases of landfill development. About half the site to the south also has been provided with final cover, and so that will reduce the precipitation going through the landfill and cut down on any potential contaminant impacts to groundwater quality. Site geology, the landfill was developed on a glacial till hill, which is a relatively unsorted mixture of silt, sand, and clay. Initially, it was developed in a excavated bore area. Bedrock below the site is metamorphic schist and gneiss. The soils below the landfill really don't yield much water, so we can talk about the superficial aquifer at the site. But really, beneath the landfill, the soils really don't yield much water. You wouldn't want to develop even a private well in that, and certainly not a public water supply. Groundwater generally flows to the west across the site, but we could see there was a component along the eastern side that also goes to the east. As noted, there's no medium or high yield aquifers within the vicinity of the site. And the bedrock is capable of providing residential type water supplies, but nothing you can develop for public usage. So before we take a look at the metals that we evaluated, I just want to point out that there's really two types of standards we're looking at. There's MMCLs, which are really health risk-based standards, and so the arsenic, chromium, and lead, and the vinyl chloride have MMCLs. And then the iron and manganese have secondary maximum contaminant levels. And those are really more based upon color, fixture staining, taste. So both these are set by either Mass DEP or US EPA. So when we took a look at the water quality, we saw that arsenic is a background metal at the site. We saw arsenic exceeded at 7 monitoring wells above the MMCL of 10 micrograms per liter. Chromium, we saw less. We saw that at 3 monitoring wells. It has a higher drinking water standard of 100 micrograms per liter. Lead at 6 monitoring wells, a standard more similar to the arsenic standard. Iron was ubiquitous across the site at a level exceeding the SMCL of 300 micrograms per liter, and manganese was similar to the iron, where you generally saw that across the site. Trace levels of vinyl chloride, that was one of the additional parameters DEP wanted to look at, was really detected at 1 monitoring well at levels that exceeded the MMCL, and then at trace levels at a couple other monitoring wells. For the study, we put together a somewhat comprehensive water quality map where we identified where the monitoring wells are, and then the 5 years of data for those 5 metals and the vinyl chloride. And so I think the state thought this was probably one of the most important maps provided with the study. Unfortunately, you can't read it on this slide very well, but it does identify where those exceedances were found. So what did we find? We basically saw a lot of types of water quality that's typical for older unlined landfills. So, I look at a lot of this type of data, and overall, the site's pretty benign. There are impacts on site, yet there's not an extraordinary amount of metals that we saw. Again, the arsenic's naturally occurring. We've got trace to low groundwater concentrations. Seems to be relatively stable at the landfill. Trace to low levels of lead and chromium. And those are probably from the older unlined areas. And then the vinyl chloride was detected sporadically at trace levels in just a few of the monitoring wells. So we didn't see that as a real compound of concern at the site, except at a couple locations. We gave a lot of water quality graphs, and I think one of the takeaways of this is that although you can see it looks like we've got spikes in the concentrations, and there's also data gaps where it wasn't detected at the analytical detection method. And so, this could have to do with fall and spring water elevations and just discharge at the site where you might see some differences in metals concentrations. So, for the chromium, that's the kind of the spiky one, and then the other 2 metals we looked at on here, which is the lead and the chromium, they're all just right along the bottom of the graph there. This is data for vinyl chloride at the well where we saw the compound at levels above the MMCL, and all the detects above the MMCL, which is only 2 parts per billion, were before 2009, and since then it's been tested for but not detected. So yes, the compound is present. It's generally present at a level that's about the drinking water standard, but that level is also very, very low, again in the couple part per billion range. And then this is a graph of the iron and manganese, and you see the manganese is the blue down along the bottom, and the iron exhibits the same kind of spiky concentration fluctuations you saw with the chromium. So once we took a look at the water quality, we wanted to see where we thought these things were going, and the wetlands that surround the site are assumed to be the discharge areas for site drainage and shallow groundwater flow. So you've got the till underlying the site where it's saturated. That's going to discharge to the wetlands that abut the site. These wetlands discharge to McKinstry Brook and ultimately to the Kennebog River. Groundwater discharge areas, or for the bedrock, are likely similar. What's happening with the metals? We think that the metals are discharging to surface water. We suspect they're being tied up in some of the organic soils in the wetlands and the sediments along the brooks. That's pretty much where we expect to see them. We had a couple recommendations of the study. One was to put in 2 additional monitoring well clusters further from the landfill site, basically at the wetland areas, so we could determine the discharge at those areas to the wetland and the stream. So we really want to document that we do have that groundwater discharge to those areas. And similarly, we suggest some nested piezometers in the wetlands just to prove that, yes, we're having that discharge into the wetlands, just to document it's not potentially going anywhere else. But that's really where we expect to see it also. And that is it, briefly.
Thank you. Do any members of the council have questions? Councilor Marcucci?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, thank you for your presentation this evening. I guess myself, one of the first concerns that I have, and I'm sorry, there's an echo in the microphone. So if you have stated this and I didn't hear you, I hope you don't mind repeating it again, and I apologize for that. With the issues of the arsenic and the chromium and the lead and the iron and the magnesium and the vinyl chloride, with all of these exceeding an MMCL, in your opinion, what's the concern? Do you have any concerns for the health and safety of the residents? I mean, is this something, because they all exceed the normal level, what can you tell me about that?
Well, what we really saw was that there was a lot of data that was below those levels. So I was only talking about where it was exceeded, but we had a lot of data that didn't exceed those MMCL levels. You know, what we see is that these metals are localized to the landfill site. The people who might be exposed to the metals would be landfill workers, particularly the people monitoring groundwater monitoring wells. And they're trained to prevent you know, any impact to them. You know, you're not going to drink the water at the site necessarily, but no one's drinking that water at the site. And the wetlands that surround the site, that's where these metals are going in the groundwater. And so we don't expect to see them beyond those wetland areas in the groundwater system.
And in your professional opinion, you don't feel that it's in the groundwater currently? When you talk about the fate and transport analysis, and you know, I'm going to be the first to tell you I'm completely ignorant to this. It's out of my realm, I guess, of understanding. If we're not concerned about the arsenic and chromium and lead, why are we concerned with the fate and transport analysis? Why are we looking, obviously I know we're looking to stabilize that because we don't want it in groundwater, but my concern obviously is groundwater. The Quinnebog River, you know, everything flows in one direction, and I think ultimately it will end up somewhere. And I'm concerned about the wells, the residents in Southbridge that have private wells. How many did you test? And, you know, is there a fate factor there also?
We didn't really look at private well water quality data as part of this study. The state had us focus on specifically the groundwater monitoring wells at the landfill. And again, one of our recommendations is to put in some multi-depth monitoring wells in the wetland areas so that we can see that the groundwater is discharging to those wetlands. You know, it appears that this is a localized site condition it's not likely to impact things that are at some distance from the landfill site.
Okay. That's all I have for now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Peliquin?
I have a number of questions, but I know that there's also a number of members of the public that also had questions, and I don't know if you would allow anyone...
The council will have their first opportunity
Okay.
to ask questions.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I know that anybody who is here who has a question, I would like to see their question get answered in some way. So thank you for that. You can't hear me? Okay, I'll try to talk louder. I have a few basic questions as to how this study came about. And if you're not the person, if you can, anybody else up here can help me out, that's great. First of all, I was wondering who commissioned the study at whose request, and basically who's paying for the study, and what is the ultimate end product? Like, I know there are recommendations at the end, but what happens next?
You want to go ahead, Chris, and answer that question?
Yeah, I don't know about the original origins. I know that the Board of Health Director, or the Health Director, had indicated that he was concerned that these reports come in and they have a lot of data in them, and who actually goes through and amalgamates, years and years of data points. So I know the Board of Health Director, I know there was some public inquiries too that were made of DEP. So I think it was actually the Board of Health that kind of initiated Ty and Bond to start to go through that data to see, what does all this mean in terms of this. So this is a first attempt. So I would say, probably public input, DEP, and then our own Board of Health were probably the three impetuses to get started. And then it's contracted where they're an independent agency to do a study on behalf of really DEP. I do want to say, and it's in the materials here, that this is a draft report. So DEP has not officially accepted this report yet. So we are talking about a little bit of a work in progress, just to be clear on that.
I don't know that I got my question. Like, who hired this firm to do the report? I don't know. Was that not part of my initial?
The town of Southbridge.
The town of Southbridge.
I think
It's contracted?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's it for now. I know there's counselors with questions. They can.
Councilor Clements?
Thank you. I was really interested to learn all the hydrogeology information. I thought that was neat to know the difference between an aquifer and an aquitard. I thought that was really interesting because I've talked to a lot of people about the difference in how water flows and doesn't flow, and why our landfill is set up the way it is, and is actually in a good position for not allowing very many contaminants to escape from it, so to speak. Not that that's good to have contaminants, but at least what's underneath is well based for it. I was curious, in my letter here, the draft that we have, I just want to make sure that there's no misconception. It's got, "Dear Mr. McQuaid, on behalf of Casella Waste Systems, we're providing your review of a third-party review and trend analysis." So I just want to make sure there's no...
So the town didn't pay for it? It was Casella that paid for it?
No, I'm just asking because I want to make sure there is no misinterpretation on what Councilor Peliquin asked in my interpretation here.
Well, I think DEP requested it, so it would go, the report would go to DEP.
Okay.
My point is that the town
initiated
it, and Casella is paying for the report to be done.
Okay.
I think that's a correct
Right, and I put in...
overview of it.
Okay, if does that work for you guys? Okay. Also, just to make it in the letter, it also talks about, as requested, following Mass DEP's review of our preliminary scope of work. So it is outlined. It's the work requirements outlined by Mass DEP. And I just want the public to know that, we're in cooperation with what Mass DEP was requiring of us. So I think it's important that we were all sent a 54-page email document with lots of maps and things. It's very interesting to see the different layouts of the land. So I do appreciate having this information. It's put me somewhat at ease, but yet also, on concern for the community. So thank you for your presentation.
Okay. Any other counselors have anything they'd like to bring forward? Councilor Vandal.
I've got a number of questions here. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Number one, have you tested the bottom of McKinstry Brook?
Yeah, no, we didn't actually do any testing. We reviewed data that's been collected at the landfill over the past 5 years. And the study was specifically focused on groundwater quality. And so there's a lot of other stuff we could have looked at. DEP was very specific in their scope of work to look at groundwater quality impacts. So
you haven't tested the bottom of the brook?
we have not tested the bottom of the brook. Okay. And it was out of our scope of work for the study.
Just to be clear, we're the third-party engineering firm to review what others have done. So we've not conducted any testing at all and not just the brook, anywhere. We're reviewing other people's work.
If contaminated groundwater is heading towards McKinstry Brook, what hazards are posed to the ecology?
Well, we didn't look at an ecological risk assessment as part of the work we did, and I don't believe one has been conducted. But I would note that the levels are very low. And generally, for surface water quality impacts, say for something like arsenic, the water quality criteria is much higher than the groundwater quality criteria, which is based upon human health risk and not ecological risk. Now,
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if there's arsenic up there, because they were throwing contaminated dirt loaded with arsenic up there. And I brought that up 3 years ago. All right? Number 3, let's say further testing shows that the groundwater is going to end up in the wetlands and in McKinstry Brook. What can be done to solve the problem?
well, we believe that the groundwater is heading there ultimately. Now, it's slow underneath the landfill site because the till,
it's
the
slow
tarps,
moving?
it's slow moving.
But it's still going.
It'll still move, you're right. And some of the metals will absorb the soils on its way. Usually you'll see more of that when it's an oxidizing condition. So when the groundwater comes up into the wetland, that's where you see the metals start to absorb onto organic soils.
So at one point, someday, it might be problematic to us, right? It's not going to do us any good.
It's hard to speculate on that, what the exact impact is to the environment along the wetlands for that.
In your opinion, where is the groundwater on the west side of the landfill going? Could it be going toward private wells on McGilpin Road?
Well, I think that the groundwater is discharging to the wetlands that are nearby the landfill. And they basically, just off the edge of the landfill, there's some wetland areas along the brook, and that's where we believe things are going. And again, one of our recommendations is to put in some monitoring well clusters in those areas to document that that's really where the groundwater is discharging.
If contaminated water ends up in the drinking water, what hazards are posed to human health?
Certainly if you have arsenic or lead or chromium concentrations at or above the MMCL,
That is above it right now. It is above it right now.
in some of the groundwater monitoring wells it is.
Right.
But if you got it into a residential well, you'd probably want to put a treatment system in for that.
Yeah, in your report, you advise that more test holes be dug. Where and why more test holes?
Well, what I'd like to see is documentation that the groundwater is in fact discharging to those wetland areas. And that's actually protective of areas beyond those wetlands. And so we'd like to see that documented so that we know where that groundwater is discharging to.
Is the chromium being found chromium 6 or chromium 3?
I don't believe they differentiated in the testing, so I'm not sure I can answer that adequately. I don't believe they tested for hexavalent chromium.
Right. In your opinion, should we be worried about the impact on the environment and drinking water?
I think that
Well, certainly we should be interested in the environment, the drinking water, yes. But we believe that the controls that are out there and the wells that are being tested and the operational DEP oversight that is going on is complying with state regulations right now.
I do think it's important to differentiate that our public drinking water supply comes from the south of the community and is nowhere in close proximity to this. The most immediate hazard would be to private wells that are located at residential places in close proximity to the landfill.
Yeah, that's true. And we did look at Mass GIS mapping to make sure that there were no public water supplies in the immediate vicinity of the landfill. None showed up on the maps, so we think that's pretty protective. There are residential private wells, but they seem to be located some distance from the landfill, which again is protective, because what we're seeing is we believe is a localized condition at the landfill site for those metals.
How far away is the Southbridge aquifer?
I'd really have to take a look at one of the Mass GIS maps on that to answer you.
Do you have any other experience analyzing groundwater quality around landfills, and where?
I probably have done, 25, 30, 35 landfill studies, and currently review groundwater quality at least 20 sites, if not 25, 30.
Have any of them, have you done work for Casella on any of the others?
I have one site where I've worked with Casella.
And I think that's about it. But I want to tell you about your report here. I think everybody's praising it, but I'll tell you, I couldn't even read it, and I have glasses. I couldn't read it. I couldn't see it up there on the screen. So if the people at home couldn't see it, to me, it's I couldn't read it. The print is so small that. So in the future, you could maybe make it a little bigger to type.
Well, I guess I should have printed them at one slide per page then.
What's that?
I should have printed them at one slide per page for the
Yeah,
handout.
if you could send it through to us one slide per page, that would be more legible. We'll send it through.
Thank you.
That's
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've had some experience in the past with these underground plumes, Thank you. Can you hear me now? Nope. I can't get any closer. Hello, test. All right, I'll do my. Okay, here we go. All right. Starting to feel like my father. A number of years ago, I was at a location that had a concern with underground water contamination through a chemical plume such as this. So, in my mind, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm referring back to that frame of reference. So in your third-party review of the data that you've looked at, and you mentioned about how this is moving, has anyone who's done any of the previous surveys determined, in terms of the plume, how big that plume is and how fast it's moving? What is the most distal point it's gotten away from the landfill, and how far is it expected to travel, given the current volume that it's holding and the projected volume of potential metal poisoning that we're experiencing?
I believe as part of the site assignment studies that they did look at the rate of movement in the groundwater for the site soils. I can't recall that offhand. We didn't reference it in the study that we had, I don't believe. From what we can tell from the data, the monitoring wells are generally close to the edge of the landfill where they are. At one point in time, maybe they weren't because you didn't have landfill development as close, but as the landfills expanded, now you have a situation where your monitoring wells are along the edge of the landfill. And so the question of whether or not we know the full extent of the plume, we need some additional monitoring wells out beyond where the existing network is. And that was really, again, one of our recommendations is to get a couple monitoring well clusters out beyond the facility in the area we think the groundwater is discharging to take a look at that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam
You
Chair.
all set?
Yep.
I have
Anybody
another
else?
question.
Counselor?
And I apologize if you're not the appropriate person to ask. Some of my questions I think would perhaps be better answered by an attorney, but bear in mind, I'm just throwing these out there. The first one, I don't know how familiar you are with the landfill site assignment, and I was wondering if the wetlands that everybody's talking of tonight are within the bounds of the landfill facility or are beyond the areas that are site assigned for waste disposal.
It's my understanding the site-assigned area is like 157 acres. The landfill footprint is smaller than that, but
Right.
I guess I don't understand the exact question. that's being
My
asked.
question is the additional monitoring, including the wetlands that are the discharge areas, are they within the site assignment, or are they beyond the boundaries of the site assignment for the landfill?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to answer that in terms of the layout of the site.
Perhaps the Board of Health Director could follow up with me on that. Somebody must know.
Yeah, we have,
Right.
in the site assignment, which I believe is part of the public documents that's on the town's website through the Board of Health, it has the different maps, and you could find the map for the 100, I think it's 157 acres, plus or minus, that was made up of the original site-assigned area. And then if you look at the overview of the landfill on that, you could actually draw that conclusion
Okay.
yourself.
I think that perhaps if there's
information's
somebody
out
on staff
there.
who could give me a hand with that, I would appreciate it. But my question is whether or not these positive ratings, if we did put in more testing wells, if they're picking up on things that are concerning for human health beyond the area that is site assigned for waste disposal. And the other thing, I know that there is a well at the airport diner, and the DEP has asked for it to be connected, for the airport diner to be connected to the public water supply provided by the town, as opposed to using the well there because it's too close to the landfill site. So given that, I mean,
Well, just to correct,
Right.
not to have information go out that just is factually incorrect. The landfill, at the airport does have a well. The airport has had the designation as being a non-public water source, because generally when the airport is in operation and it's just the terminal building, it's less than 25 people. DEP has looked at that site and said, no, there's probably more than 25 people that go to the diner. The DEP came in and said, okay, we would request that the town formally submit that be a public water supply because it provides water to more than 25 people at a time. The town, the DPW director and myself, made the decision, instead of going through and doing the additional work that's necessary to be a public water supply, why wouldn't we just, now that we have the water on Commercial Drive, why wouldn't we just put in a water line to provide public water to that site? And the second part, we obviously had a tornado up at that site and we lost a lot of buildings. There's no fire hydrants. There's no fire protection capabilities in that area. So we took advantage of the opportunity to put some hydrants in. So it was more of a decision made by the town to provide public water as opposed to asking the airport manager to become a public water supply.
Oh, okay. I was under the impression that this was something that the DEP had asked for, so.
Well, DEP said you have to do one or the other. The town said we would provide the water through the public water supply and just be done with it. Part of that, too, is the water supply up there is fairly close to the septic system that operates in the airport diner. So having a public water supply near a septic system is probably not the best of ideas either.
And my other question, which I apologize if this is a question that you can answer, but just in trying to do some background reading in preparation for your presentation tonight, I was looking at trying to suss out where our liability would be if we are, in fact, going to be picking up metals that are outside the areas designated for waste disposal. Like, does this expose us to liability under the Clean Water Act, because these wetlands are tributaries to the Quinnebog River, which crosses state lines? So I don't know how much of this we would even be able to talk about in public session, but I think that I would like to see some sort of analysis of what our liability is here and what this would mean financially to the town if we're directed to have to do remediation. Because if this does move slow-moving over time, if it is, I could see it potentially becoming a bigger problem over time, and I'm glad to hear it's as localized as it is right now. I appreciate your recommendation for more testing, but ultimately, I know that there's somebody else operating that landfill, but we own it, it's ours, so we're responsible, and as somebody who's been in town for a long time, and I have kids who are growing up in this town, like, I want to look at the long-term liability of this issue. I would feel a little bit more comfortable if we did that. And I know this has nothing to do with engineering per se. This is, another field altogether. But I have questions there that I think the council would be well advised to look at.
Yes, I agree. I have a question. This is a draft. Are you intending to come back after DEP reviews it?
When the report is finalized, would you guys come back and?
That's up to the town. We would
Certainly.
certainly be willing to come back.
I would request that you do come back after the report has been reviewed by the DEP and finalized. I would like to see you again.
We would love to come back.
Thank you. And I'm sure we will have more questions, because this is an issue that does generate an awful lot of questions and interest within the community. Does anybody else up here have anything further they want, any questions or comments or anything like that?
I had one more question.
Well, let me, are you finished, or?
I think this will be my last question.
Okay,
I was
go
just
ahead.
wondering if anybody has an idea as to whether Casella is looking at these recommendations and would be moving to implement them, or if they don't have an intention of implementing them. So,
Well, I think in coordination with the Board of Health, and these guys can correct me if I'm wrong, the sense that I got from reading the report and asking questions about it is we are in the landfill business. The town has been in the landfill business since 1979. The landfill business is a risk-oriented business. And what we want to do is to try to do everything we can to minimize the risk of being in the landfill business. What I was able to ascertain from some of my discussions is that we have a liner, well, we don't have a liner under a small portion of it that was the town's. What I didn't realize until I asked the questions the other day is that they did put a plastic cap over that, and then they put soil on top of that unlined section. What that does is that stops groundwater from getting in and stops any migration or slows the migration significantly. In the other section of the landfill, they have a single liner and a collection system. So we have pretty good protection in that. And the newer sections with the double liner and the collection system, it's even better. So the risk factors are probably more focused around the older section where we do not have the liner. I think what's being recommended is that there are some signs, and they are sporadic, of high levels. So they're here for a year, then they disappear for a year. And I think that creates some confusion in terms of what does that information mean, because it's not a consistent rise of contaminants. So I think really from my standpoint, the prudent next step would be let's make sure we continue to put in the monitoring wells to see where the migration, if it's going to occur, where is it going, and how fast is it going. And obviously, I think the public interest, we want to make sure we protect the private wells in the area immediately. For the town, probably the closest one is the airport site, so we have that already underway to be resolved. But at least my 2 cents as town manager here in the community is that we would advocate to continue the study, continue to look at it, continue the data collection, and let's see what we're in for. But I think the good news is this isn't a site that was built on sand. This isn't a site that was built on a swamp. This isn't a site that lends itself to quick migration. So for a hazardous business that we're in, we've taken quite a bit of good due diligence measures to make sure that we are doing everything we can to minimize that. And I think that's a fair characterization of the impact of that report. And I think really the next prudent steps is let's continue to study, let's continue to monitor, and see where this is leading us.
I think that Ty and Bond would concur with that statement, that the that the groundwater issues we're seeing are from the unlined older portion, that the cap has been put on over that area, that the town has taken the proper remedial steps to contain that old area of the site, and that the state is not asking you to do any further remedial steps for that area, just simply to monitor it. And indeed, this is one of the steps towards monitoring. So you have dry entombed, is the phrase we use, that waste, and eliminated any further groundwater, we believe, rainwater from getting into the groundwater from that unlined area. So you've taken the right steps to protect your interest.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. Well, I want to thank you. I'm going to limit specific 5 minutes for any citizen. This is a presentation to the council. You have 5 minutes. There will be no spillover after that. So if you have any interest in asking a few questions, that's your time limit, and it won't be extended. Okay? So if you wish to ask them a few questions, you can do so. I will allow that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just for clarification on a couple of things, I know Councilor Marcucci, thank you very much for asking that question about whether it's in the groundwater or not. I was unclear with the answer. The answer sounded like it wasn't in the groundwater yet, but I think it actually is. Was that your understanding?
Yes.
It actually is in the groundwater.
That's my understanding. I could be wrong.
All right.
But it is.
Thank you. The data itself, to the gentleman, the question there is who's collected the data? I know that I understand that they got the data from various sources or historical sources, but where did that data come? Who actually did the sample collection? Do we know? Is it Casella personnel or was it independent?
I believe it was Casella's landfill consultant, Geosyntec, but they probably subcontracted it to a company. Pardon me?
They're having a hard time hearing.
Yeah, I believe it was Casella's landfill consultant that coordinated the sampling, and that's where we got the data. The data had been previously submitted to Mass DEP, and we got a summary of the last 5 years of data from them to take a look at.
Okay, so the actual samples are collected by Casella personnel or consultant, but paid by Casella. I noticed that there were dips where it showed that no data was showing. Just for clarification, does that mean that the data wasn't collected, or does it mean that there was zero contaminants?
On the data graphs, that means that we didn't show that because the graphing function couldn't handle a non-detect there, so we left it a blank. But that it was tested for. Unless it was shown some other way, like not sampled, something like that. But the data was there. It was just at a level below the analytical detection limit for that analysis.
Thank you. And just one more question, because I had a hard time hearing, so I'm not sure the question was clearly answered, or it's not. I don't understand the answer. The contaminants that are there. The question I think was, what are is it dangerous to health? I think I'm more concerned with what are the actual hazards? What are the dangers? Are we talking birth defects? Are we talking, mental brain damage? What are we talking about with these kind of contaminants? Specifically chromium and I believe it was selenium?
Well, we looked at arsenic, chromium, and lead. Those three metals are associated with human health impacts. And one of the things we look at are exposure routes and exposures. It was really beyond the scope of our study to evaluate that. But unless you're exposed to that metal in the groundwater in a way that you can be impacted by it, it's benign. And so at the site, the people who are most exposed are the environmental monitoring personnel going out to sample the wells. But they're trained to minimize exposure. They'll wear gloves. They'll wash up after they leave the site and just minimize your exposure risk.
And Thank you very much. So I guess that's it for some clarification. Thank you very much for having a little time there.
I have a question, if you don't mind, Madam Chair. Monique Manna, 20 Maple Street. I would like you to clarify for the town the contaminated groundwater that you saw in the report. Was this isolated to the landfill? Before we have a huge scare on our hands, can you please clarify if this was isolated to the landfill? Thank you.
Any other question?
Is there a question?
What was the?
Is there
Well, the data we looked at were from monitoring wells that are adjacent to the landfill. And one of our recommendations is to put in some monitoring wells that are at some distance from the landfill, but in the discharge areas, so that you'd have a better idea of the extent of any metals impact. One of the things you just need to realize is the further you get from the site, the more dilution there's going to be also, so that you're not likely to see the concentrations as high at the landfill at a further distance. It's possible, but generally you don't. The data is collected at the site, not at some distance from the landfill.
Okay. That's it.
It appears we've come a long way, because when these reports were first brought to our Board of Health 5 years ago, there was a complete denial that they were correct. They were calling these readings of lead and chromium and arsenic anomalies. Even at a recent town Board of Health meeting in which Mr. Marchetti was asking questions, and they're indignant that he'd even ask questions about this. And when I brought up this consistent release of heavy metals, the town manager, I'm sure he was provided this information by perhaps the landfill operator or someone. They were blaming it on the lubricant that was used to dig the new test well. So I'd really like to pat this firm on the back for, especially for some of its recommendations to increase the monitoring equipment around the landfill. That's a good thing. But I want to remind some people of things. Like the town manager respectfully came here after the site assignment, and I doubt he's had the time to look over the dozens of hours of testimony. But even the landfill operator, a Casella Waste Systems expert, admitted that all liners leak. So although in our generation, or I would say this half a generation, liners I think are warranted for 5 or 10 years, this is going to get worse over the years, even with the liners. And as we know, throughout the country, unless we have some kind of miracle covering, these coverings that create the dry tombs also leak. And all in all, the truth is the water isn't the greatest concern when it comes out of the landfill. It's the air. Now, we were told back during the site assignment that with each particular increase of waste, there would be a public hearing. We were just told by the town manager at the last meeting that they had the increase up to 405,000 tons. There was no public hearing. I've sent in letters to the DEP at each level and was never told that they were even looking for comments from the public. So that one squeaked by. But something that didn't squeak by, and it caused a lot of problems a few years ago. But despite what we were promised, we do share the liability with the landfill operator. Now, tonight we heard, and I agree 1,000%, we have an extraordinary Department of Public Works in this town. We really do. I don't want to embarrass any of the workers there by name, but there's a few gentlemen I know in particular that really know their stuff about landfills. And I firmly believe that this town has the competence to take control of that landfill. There are at least 3, if I wanted to be a stickler, a dozen site assignment conditions that are currently being broken. We can take back that landfill. We can take control of it. We can actually make some money on it. Because as many of you may recall, during those hearings, we were promised $3.5 million the next year. And the town knew there was going to be a lawsuit coming. Promised the town's going to get $3.5 million. I think the town manager can confirm we have yet to get, perhaps, I doubt we even got $2 million in any year since they've been there. So we're going in the right direction. I don't want to be critical of these gentlemen, but one thing that Councilor Marcucci asked was a medical-related question. Outside of a person who was the department head of the Department of Public Works of the State University of New York in Albany, who said this landfill would be pretty much, I'm paraphrasing, but a pox upon the population of this town. We need to ask doctors, medical personnel, about the risks, the medical risks involved with the landfill. I don't care if this gentleman has a PhD in geology and geologists all over the world seek his opinions. It's probably true that he didn't attend medical school. And some of you may remember 22 local doctors had the chutzpah to stand up and say this landfill was bad for the health of the community. And I only know of one doctor in town that disagreed with them. So I don't want to go over my 5 minutes, but we need to watch out for the air. It's nice that we're watching the water. If this isn't going beyond the landfill, why is someone paying for water for people all around the landfill? It's nice that they're paying for their water, their drinking water, but you shouldn't wash in chromium either. I have one question for this gentleman. What is a safe level of chromium? What is a safe level of lead? And what is a safe level of arsenic consumption for a human being? What is the safe level of chromium consumption?
Well, the EPA and Mass DEP has set the Mass DEP has set the Massachusetts maximum contaminant levels for drinking water, and I believe it's 100 micrograms per liter for chromium, 10 micrograms per liter for arsenic, and 15 micrograms per liter for lead. And those are the referenced drinking water standards we evaluated the water quality at. So,
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for answering a question. Okay. I'm going to let two more people speak, and then we're moving on from this. So if you want to speak, you have 5 minutes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Zotos. I live on Main Street, 312. And I did my own unscientific study all my life. My father and I fished McKinstry Brook from when I was about 5, 6 years old up until around 1988. It was a favorite fishing place of my dad's. My dad's the most famous fisherman in Southbridge. He wrote a book about fishing in the early 70s, a book that everybody my age probably has in their home right now, autographed copies. We did 2 printings of it. And it's a very famous book in Southbridge. But we fished McKinstry all our lives, and it was always very bountiful. In my father's book, he refers to McKinstry Brook as heaven. It's the most heavenly spot in Southbridge, he said. He thought it looked like a place where the Indians might make a camp. And where that spot is today, Dave Aho built a bridge. So you'll know where it is if you ever take a walk on that trail that we have there in McKinstry Brook. So at that spot, that was my father's favorite fishing spot in his life, and he fished Southbridge for 50 years. Now, every time I came home on vacation, I fished there. And in 1988, I was here for 6 months taking care of my mom. And my dad came up. My mom had a heart attack. So me and my dad fished McKinstry Brook in 1988 3 or 4 times a week because we love trout. And it was very bountiful of fish. Then I came home in 97, 98, and the first year I started fishing, there was a few trout. And by the year 2000, when I started running cable, there were no more trout in McKinstry Brook. And McKinstry Brook starts in Spencer, comes all the way down into Southbridge. And we fished it. We fished the whole length of it all our lives. There was no, after 98, there were no more trout, and the ones you got were really small and even looked deformed. That was in 98. In 98. So now it's 2013, and there are no fish in McKinstry Brook. Also, there's a famous video in Southbridge that's played for 10 years in Southbridge, where in the year 2000, I'm singing in front of the wetland. When you go up Page Hill and go to the airport, there was a wetland on the right. And I'm singing there with Mark Jewell in 1998, and that wetland had the most amazing green algae on it. And once we started singing, all the frogs and all the birds started singing with us. A beaver ran away, birds started flying. It's a very funny video. Everybody in Southbridge has seen it. That wetland today is absolutely dead. No algae grows on that water. Nothing living. There are no frogs. There are no birds. It's a dead wetland. We killed that wetland. When I made the movie of the landfill fire in 2002, I showed in that film that everything from the fire ran right down that hill into that wetland. And that's when it started dying. And so you can't tell me that we haven't had a problem. I've known it was a problem since '98. And I've personally produced 40 hours of landfill hearings. I produced it. And I knew then that this was a bad idea. And I voiced my opinion then. I'm voicing my opinion now. And, you know, I'll bring the book. I'll bring my dad's book on fishing as Exhibit A. That was one of the most beautiful spots in Southbridge. And we have destroyed it. And I'll go fishing this April, everybody. And anybody wants to go with me, I'll go fishing up there in April, and we'll see what's there. That's the real way to tell. That's the way I've told all my life. And right now, I fish in Connecticut. There's a lot of brooks in Connecticut I like. You can get some remote areas away from everything, and there's still good fish. But that's how far I got to go to get a good trout nowadays. And when my dad was fishing...
Mr. Zotos, do you have a question for these gentlemen? They're behind you?
I'm educating the town.
Because your time is up, almost.
I'm educating the town, Ms.
Yes, excuse me?
I'm educating the town on why McKinstry Brook is dead and why that wetland is dead. I have answers. I don't have questions.
So you have no questions?
I have answers.
Oh, I see.
We should stop this, and we should stop it now. And once we stop it, then we'll have the time to find out what's wrong with it. But I wouldn't continue to poison, and I wouldn't continue to say we don't know, there's nothing wrong. I know that stuff isn't going up, and I don't care if it goes left and right. But I'll guarantee you it is going down. So, good luck, everybody. I'll let you know how the fishing expedition works.
Okay. Is there anybody else? Is there anybody else? I want to thank you, gentlemen, very much for your time. Okay. Educating the public. Okay. We're going to move right into Citizens Forum about other things that are not on this agenda. Any citizens wishing to come forward? Okay, moving on. Agenda item number 8. Vote to appoint 6 sergeants to serve as liquor agents effective immediately for an indefinite period. Hector Arvello, Wayne Boiteau, Steve Belrose, Carlos Dingy, Jose Dingy, and Michael Sullivan.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Councilor Regis.
Which Arvello is this supposed to be? Hector or Gerald?
Is it Gerald or Hector? It's Gerald.
Thank you.
We'll correct that then.
We gotta get this right.
Sorry.
You got that wrong at the meeting.
Okay. Anything else regarding this vote? Did you want to speak on this? Is that?
Very quickly, we believe that this will help enhance the supervisor on the street to be able to gain information and access and compliance with the liquor regulations.
Thank you. Can I have a roll call, please?
Councilor Langevin?
Yes.
Councilor Marcucci?
Yes.
Councilor McDonald?
Yes.
Councilor Moriarty?
Yes.
Councilor Nicola?
Yes.
Councilor Peliquin?
Yes.
Counselor Regis?
Yes.
Counselor Vandal?
Yes.
Counselor Clements?
Yes.
9 yes.
Thank you. Agenda item number 9, discuss and vote to appropriate up to $40,000 from free cash to allow the town manager to enter into contract with a police management consultant and auditor for the purpose of studying and providing recommendations as a result of a petition submitted by town council on September 6, 2012.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Councilor Moriarty.
Just one question through you to the manager, more or less for clarification with the scope of services that you had put together, being broken up into 2 different categories, and we talked about the kind of basically different tiers as to what would be done, alternates, and possibly breaking it into 2 different audits, if you will, versus one. I'm just curious exactly how that process will go once, if and when this goes out through RFP, through bid, through everything else, and these come in. What would that process be in terms of settling on XYZ? Because I've been obviously, just as far as my own clarification, then certainly if we're going just on lowest number, in theory, it's going to be the lowest scope of service. So I'm just kind of trying to wrap my head around that part of it. The actual execution, I suppose, of settling on who's being used.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what I would do is I would send the scope of service. I do have a phrase in there that there may be firms that can conduct both elements of it. So my intent is to send all 3 pages to each of the potential bidders, and then as committed to the other night, I will put it on Compass and Goods and Services Bulletin to make sure it's distributed statewide. When the numbers come in, it's really going to be a question of how much bang for the buck can we get. And in my mind, the $40,000 is broken up where it's $25,000 for the management consultant and then $15,000 for the audit. If we're able to get the base review plus alternate 2 for that $25,000, then, or just under $25,000, then I will get as much done as I can for the money that's been appropriated. So if the 40 is appropriated, obviously I can't go above the appropriation. So if 2 proposals come in and it's $50,000, then I would have to scope it back. So I was going to let the process kind of feed in to see what the highest quality we can get for the money that was appropriated.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything they want to add to this before we take a vote? Do you have something you wanted to say?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Monique Manna, 20 Maple Street, Southbridge. I come to you tonight as a concerned citizen and a concerned citizen subcommittee member of the PPP. I, for one, did not support this agenda item. I think it's a waste of our tax dollars. But my main concern, one of my main concerns tonight, was a statement that was made in subcommittee. And I thought I should come to council and tell the full council of that statement that was made. Councilor Moriarty made a statement that he knew someone that was starting an auditing business. And they told him that they could do the audit for $4,900. That right there concerned me. And like I said, I thought I would bring this to the attention of the full council. And I would hope that if this agenda item does pass, that you do a thorough investigation on the people that bid for this auditing to make sure they have no personal connections with any of the town councilors. That to me would be a concern. It's a deep concern of mine. I was able to look over the scope of work that town manager Clark had put together, and it looks like the money that could be spent on this audit is anywhere between $27,000 and $45,000 of our taxpayer money for something that, I have a letter here, the Auditor of the Commonwealth's office clearly states in their letter. If you want to look down to paragraph 3, it starts in on sentence number 5. Given the nature of this request and absence of any significant allegations of wrongdoing or criminal activity, the Office of the State Auditor declines to conduct an audit of the Southbridge Police Department. So I'm assuming that paperwork went up to the State Auditor's office and they asked for the State Auditor to get involved in something that was they felt was going on in the police department. Well, it's clear here that the State Auditor didn't find any wrongdoings. And then it says, certain items listed in your petition that relate to finance and compliance would be appropriate items to include in the scope of the town's annual audit. Doesn't our accountant, the one that our town pays for, do the audits of the town? Wouldn't she know of any wrongdoings? This, to me, is a waste of money, a waste of my taxpayer money, a waste of your taxpayer money, It's waste, and that's what I want to bring to your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Manna. Councilor Regis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I, through you, ask the Chief a question?
Certainly.
Yes.
Chief, could you explain briefly or summarize the accreditation process and the cost of such a process?
About 20 years ago, several departments started looking at the federal accreditation, meaning like a hospital does. The hospitals routinely are accredited by certain standards, and they go through literally hundreds of standards of everything you can imagine within that process. They look at it, they compare you to what other hospitals do, and they decide whether or not your standards are up to theirs. The state does the same thing. They have an agency that does that for police now.
And there's a cost to this?
Yes, we signed up for it. It was $700 for the first year, and we've just started that process again. We had looked at it years ago and then couldn't go forward as personnel diminished, so we've reinstituted that, and we're doing our self-assessment now.
And this process evaluates your policies and procedures, your internal controls, and evaluates that compared to other...
Exactly. It measures you against all the other police departments in the state, and those are measured against the federal standards. They literally copied the federal standards, grabbed that, looked at it, and they evaluate themselves now compared to that. So we've begun that again. It makes sense to do it. It's an extremely lengthy process, time-consuming, but I think it gives us a good snapshot. What we've done for years now since I've been chief is all of our policies and procedures come directly from the mass chiefs. It's very similar to when Mr. Clark and I look at something with, the marijuana bylaw that's coming up. Look at what's out there, look at what people have done, let them pay the attorneys to check and do the fees, and then we basically copy their standards. And that's what this is. And we've taken those over the last decade, and when something comes up, whatever it may be, firearms we're just talking about today, if the later vote goes through, we're looking at other people's policies for how they handle patrol rifles. Look at someone who's been doing it for a few years, take their standards. It saves us a lot of attorney fees again, and we know it's been tested, and it simply makes sense. We do it with the bylaws and all the rest all the time.
And during this assessment process, if they find any substandard policies or anything like that, do they make recommendations to the department?
Yes, well, that's exactly what the process does. You do a self-assessment. You go through, a couple of hundred different standards. You assess yourself, and then what happens is you contact the office who handles that. A woman by the Donna Taylor Moores is the woman who runs it. She sets up other police agencies to come in. They evaluate you. They see if you have, in fact, what you say you have. Then they make recommendations, plus or minus, or what's good or what's not.
Thank you, Chief.
Councilor Clements?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is very important to me, and I was away last week and couldn't make the PPP meeting. But it was so important that I wanted to hear the meeting, and I know that Evelyn and our recording secretaries generally actually record these meetings, so I went in and I listened today to the meeting in its entirety, and I made some notes based on the information and the back and forth, and it was a very lively discussion, very interesting discussion. and I have some comments on that. The original petition was to discuss concerns within the department, and I was led to believe the language was stern to show our support for those officers who allegedly had these concerns. And it was a concern, and that's why I signed on to bring it to council to discuss. And if the goal was to address and improve the police department operations, it appears this is occurring. All change is an ongoing process and directly linked to the effort invested. It appears that steps such as going through the accreditation process outlined to us, coincidentally, you just mentioned it, at a previous meeting, along with other changes that the chief has briefed us on, adequately address the concerns that were outlined in the original petition. This up to $40,000 expense will not buy a new police cruiser to make our streets safer, or new protective vests or equipment, nor provide for additional training. The Auditor's Office, in their letter dated November 5th, 2012, that Mrs. Manna mentioned, suggests alternatives, and we haven't even taken the time to investigate these alternatives to spending up to $40,000. Then I quote from the letter, "Besides the town's annual audit, it mentions performance measures, including staffing, training, and resource utilization, may be best addressed by public safety experts. I would suggest you contact the Executive Office of Public Safety for guidelines in this regard." That was by Laura Marlin. She was the first deputy auditor who wrote this letter to us. So as I said, we haven't done that. If we vote this appropriation, we will not have done our due diligence to the citizens whose taxes provide these funds in our community. We have turned a blind eye on the importance of the accreditation process and how that would identify areas of deficiency, but more importantly, it would allow the department as a whole to work together to accomplish this. And there was some dissension, obviously, 8 months ago within the department. This process requires that the officers, the employees work together and provide a self-assessment and beyond the scope of what they do. All at a significantly lower cost. We just heard $700 or thereabouts. Perhaps each year there's a cost to it, but at $700 we can get a lot of years out of this. Anyone who has been through these accreditation processes, be it a school, a business, you mentioned the hospitals, the ISO processes that the businesses go through, know that no stone goes unturned and the ultimate recognition has great rewards. How nice would it be if our community was known as an accredited police department instead of one that had an audit and spent $40,000, put that on the shelf, and something that we could have done ourselves in-house and with the help of the rest of these state agencies for a fraction of the cost. Much has changed since the issue first arose 8 months ago, as I mentioned. Rather than waste money, we can take constructive internal efforts to improve our police department. Each vote we take is a culmination of independent data and oversight. At least I feel that way as a counselor. And it may have sounded like the way to go 8 months ago, but now this is a new vote. And I know on the tape I heard somebody talk about, we voted for this then, we need to see this through, we need to see this through. Well, sometimes seeing it through is not what needs to be done. Sometimes you need to stand up and you need to do what's right. Sometimes you need to change your mind based on the information that you gathered and the education that you've garnered over the last few months and say to yourself, is this really what is needed now, 8 months from the time when a letter was written, when concerns were made? I don't think so. I'm not supporting spending the town's hard-earned money when we should do something else first and see what we can do ourselves with the high-priced department costs that we have, with the heads of this town that we have that can work on this program with their officers, within the departments, with our budget department, with our auditor right internal here. Do it ourselves. Why spend the money? And I hope that you all, as counselors up here, take a hard look at your vote from 8 months ago, and you come up with a different plan for tonight, because I don't think we need to spend the money, and each vote is independent. So I appreciate your time. I was out. I couldn't say all this at the meeting, and I do appreciate you giving me the time tonight. Thank you.
Council. Anybody else have anything? Well, Councilor Moriarty.
I was planning on just kind of leaving it where it was, but since it was referenced, as far as the statement I had made at PPP, I did state that I do know somebody who is recently, I guess, starting up in this business. This is a spouse of a friend, former coworker. not somebody I'm necessarily close to or anything like that. Certainly not a family member. Certainly not anything like that. This isn't, clearly, it's not an issue of patronage, at least to me. This isn't Tammany Hall. And again, I know the police chief knows one of the individuals that runs this place, and certainly he can, if he so chooses, vouch for whether or not he feels the individual is above board and forthright, which from what I've seen personally, but have heard from some of the area chiefs and others in the field, is beyond reproach. And then just lastly, just to me, it's one of the biggest issues has become accountability. It's not a campaign promise. It's not just a buzzword. It's something that, to reference what Councilor Langevin had said and was alluded to in the most recent comments, it's more than just a campaign promise or a buzzword. It's something that you do want to follow through on. And I think that's where this goes. That's all. Thank you.
Well, we're going to move ahead on this. I'm just going to reiterate what I said back in September. I have no intention of supporting this. Other ways to go about this without spending this type of money, even if it is up to $40,000. But I'm not going to just go ad nauseum on the same thing over and over and over again. People's minds have been made up. We'll move along. Could we have our roll call, please?
Councilor Marcucci?
Yes.
Councilor McDonald?
Yes.
Councilor Moriarty?
Yes.
Councilor Nicola?
No.
Councilor Peliquin?
Yes.
Councilor Regis?
No.
Councilor Vandal?
Yes.
Councilor Clements?
No.
Councilor Langevin?
Yes.
6 yes, 3 no.
Agenda item number 10, vote to approve proposed marijuana addition to bylaw section 7-302, quote, prohibition of intoxicating liquors, end quote, and to amend said bylaw to read, quote, prohibition of intoxicating liquors and marijuana in public places, end quote. Quote, no person shall have in their possession an open container containing any intoxicating liquor or smoke and ingest marijuana in any park, playground, cemetery, conservation land, or other public place in the town of Southbridge except otherwise permitted by the town manager. Any person violating this bylaw and or unable to provide identification shall be punishable and face fines as provided in Section 1-111 of this code, Article 8, Section 31-1, Town Council meeting November 29th, 1974, July 8th, 1975. This is the first reading.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Councilor Clements?
Just a question on that. Does combining it as liquor and marijuana have any issue in terms of not being able to separate? Because there are times perhaps when we allow a party in a park or something, and people take out a liquor license, say, or something. I know, right? But can the town manager separate the bylaw like that? I'm just curious if it has to be two, or if one. Is that what towns have been doing, combining one? Just want to.
Well, I think in this circumstance, the marijuana law that was passed said that it cannot be used in a public place.
Right.
So there would be no exception for the public place for the marijuana component of this.
I just didn't know
I
if
think that's correct, right?
Yes.
All right. I appreciate it. Okay, just making sure we're. Yep.
Anybody else have anything? Councilor Pelican?
I was wondering if we could talk about the existing policy with a marijuana use in public arrest of the police department now, and how it would change as a result of this bylaw change. What policy change are you looking for, and how does this bylaw provide that for you?
Because of the drastic change in the law governing marijuana, I believe it's important that we make this statement that we as a community don't want this done in public. And as I believe Mr. Clark stated earlier, I think a very important piece of this should be the moratorium, the request for the moratorium for 1 year. What's really happening is there's huge public health issues with this, meaning they haven't determined how they're going to do this supposed doctor's note. They don't know how this is going to get grown. I saw several communities, a piece just came out since this subcommittee meeting about how are you actually going to get this? How are you going to let people grow it? Do you grow your own? How much is that? You know, there's so many questions with this that just haven't been answered. My primary concern, as it often is with crime, is that we don't go into people's homes lightly. There's search warrants, there's procedures. You know, a lot of the things that happen in private are very well guarded, and respectfully, I believe in that very strongly. However, in public, I think that's a different issue. When we see somebody, even with very small amounts of narcotics transactions in front of a school or someplace else, I think we as a society take that very serious. So with that in mind, I think the public part of this, we should make a statement about. I think this does that. That changes that policy, that we're not going to accept that at all. As you mentioned at the subcommittee, I think it's important that we say they have to have some kind of identification. We've run into concerns with people getting 21D violations. And, you know, if you're a young person, a lot of times you don't have positive identification on you. That makes that very difficult. And if, in fact, they don't provide identification, they can be arrested for this, very similar as with alcohol. If you're consuming alcohol in public and you don't identify yourself. So it makes a couple of statements that way. But I think the most important thing, if the council would consider, is the one-year moratorium, because there are so many questions, I believe, that need to be answered before this goes forward in any capacity in a good way for the community. So,
Just to follow up on the chief's point, a couple things. Number one, a moratorium is not included within this, so this is really the first step, and operationally this would allow for the non-criminal dispositions. It gives the police officer the opportunity to issue a ticket and avoid the court system at this stage. It gives the young person an opportunity to have a non-criminal disposition to it before it becomes a court matter. And then really the intent, and I think I got this from the subcommittee, that, you know, I think that the subcommittee members and the folks that were there do want administration to continue to have a strict interpretation of the law that was passed, and to make sure that we don't over-encourage any illegal activities. So administration will put together something more comprehensive with the chief to come back the issue of the moratorium and other controls within the confines of the law. But we will be following up with a kind of stage 2. But this is the first initial opportunity to start to lay the groundwork.
May I ask the chief, Madam Chair, to clarify his answer? Because I felt like the question, the policy question is what I want to know. So right now, if you encounter a resident smoking marijuana in public, you do not arrest them. You issue a 21D ticket.
right now, honestly, I don't know. And this is getting thrown all over the state. What if somebody standing on the street when I walk out of here has a note from their doctor that says, you may possess medical marijuana? Technically, right now, that's okay. The law says okay. Just because the Board of Health, just because the State Board of Health hasn't said what that form should be, nobody has these answers. My concern is that, hey, say one of our neighboring communities decides this is a great way to make money and a bunch of their people start farming this. Okay, that's up to them. They say if you have more than 5 acres, that's okay. Do we want that next door, or do we want that outside of any business right now? I don't think so. So in my estimation, this is the best way to at least address the public use of it at this moment. Right now, according to the law that I've read, it's legal. They can walk down the street with it with a note from Dr. Smith. I have no way of verifying that. The Board of Health does not know how to verify that. The state police don't know how to verify it. There's been, no real thought went into this other than on the side of the folks who pushed this forward. They basically moved away across the country, looked at things they've stumbled over in getting these laws passed, and by the time they got to us, they did a pretty good job in making it unenforceable. So as a community, I think this is a positive thing to keep it off the street.
So do you mean to tell me that right now if somebody is smoking marijuana in public, that the police officer just lets them go on their way? Is that...
No, I mean to tell you that if a person has a note from a doctor that says you have the right to have marijuana for medical use, right now, as of January 1st, that law has passed. And towns do not know how to address that. And they don't know. One of the things they say is you're allowed to have a 3-month supply in your person. Nobody has said what's a 3-month supply. One of the Mass Chiefs did a bit of a study, and it has been determined in other states that that's 160 joints. I don't know.
But this law covers possession. It doesn't cover possession. It covers use. So what I'm concerned about is I want to talk about specifically what this specific legislation does.
Right.
I understand that this is a can of worms, and there's a lot of issues surrounding this, but just in terms of the nuts and bolts of what this law does in terms of how the department operates. Like right now, somebody is encountered smoking marijuana in public. Are they issued a 21D violation?
If they don't have a doctor's note on them, yes, the procedure would be to issue that. If
Okay.
they have a doctor's note, I don't know. And I wish I had an answer. And that's why, to tell you the truth, so many communities have looked at so many different options, and the one that I believe is the most correct is what I discussed with Mr. Clark, that I'm requesting that we look seriously at a moratorium. Let's get answers to the questions. All of your questions are very valid, and I just don't want to give you bad information. The Mass Chief's attorney hasn't been able to tell us. Attorneys throughout the state haven't been able to. I know people who work for doctors' offices who are getting bombarded with the requests, and I know physicians who are saying, what no? People got to be very careful with this. A lot of folks will have the misconception that this is a prescription. It is absolutely not a prescription. This is like you go to your doctor and you say, gosh, I really hurt my back. I can't go to work tomorrow, doctor. And they look at you and say, okay, your boss requires a note. I'll give you a note. Nobody knows what form that's in. So, I mean, to me, that's glaring. How do they determine that? I think I said at subcommittee, they finally made a Massachusetts identification card for police officers. That's standard. You can imagine, when people go into someone's home or an investigation, whatever it may be, there was never a standard police identification. I only say that because it took 4 years to do that. I don't know how long it's going to take for them to say, this is what the doctor's note should be, and this is a 3-month supply. And we went to the seminar at the Mass Municipal, and they had folks there. The person who runs the State Board of Health was there, and several other leaders in the state. We asked all these questions there. What do you want us to do? And they said, give us time, give us time. And 3 of the 4 panel members mentioned the moratorium, and that's what I brought back to Mr. Clark, because from what the professionals were saying, I think that's the best course of action. I'm sorry that's so long. I wish I could give you an answer. I wish there was something I could read to you, give to you, and say, this is the law. As the law stands right now, I guess if you're a licensed physician, you can write a note. They can take that, and they can possess up to a 3-month supply, whatever that is. I don't know.
Council comments? Basically, we're just putting into place something to help deflect some of the fraud and misuse that's going to happen, obviously, because the doctor writes a note and then somebody makes a copy anyway. So if you have this note in your possession and yet you're in a public place, like open public drinking, you're going to get a fine. You're going to get something at least. At least this will keep them behind the doors, hopefully.
Well, I
And
kind
not
of
just
look at
all
it
over our
akin to
streets
alcohol. I
and
mean, alcohol's
potentially
legal.
selling,
Certainly, if you're
to
21
friends.
years old, you can have alcohol, no problem. But we don't allow people to stand in
Right.
a public place with a bottle of alcohol or a can of beer, whatever, and consume that.
Right.
And that's really, I just literally took this with our alcohol bylaw and thought, at least maybe it'll keep it off the street until boards of health decide, the attorneys decide, they work their way through it.
And this will give you a little help.
To
regulate it.
I know this is really partially a philosophical question, and does the council feel that after people voted for this, does the council want to agree with that? I mean, literally, there are people across the state who said, hey, I mean, I've seen politicians tell us this when we went to them, say, you're killing us here, what are you doing? And they're like, hey, the people spoke, that's what they want. So, philosophically, we, as a community, have to decide, is that what we want? So that's the whole policy thing, it goes to that.
Councilor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The thing that comes to mind, I understand what the chief's trying to do here as far as getting some teeth so they have some way of regulating the use of it out in the public. Because, in my opinion, we may have voted on it as a people and the majority may have spoke. We still have a right to regulate it, and we need to give the chief the tools to regulate it in the form of this bylaw. So I'm in favor of passing it for that very simple reason, to get it off the streets and in the residents where it needs to be, and give our police force some tools to work with. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Councilor.
In reading the supporting documentation provided with this agenda item, the memo from the police department, you included a memo from the Law Enforcement Dimensions LLC, and it details police procedures that it recommends based on the state legislation. And the state legislation does restrict use in public places. It says under public consumption, smoking marijuana in a public place is against the state law, which was passed. And it said, if less than 1 ounce, offender must be issued a civil marijuana ticket. I'm assuming that's a 21D violation, a municipal ticket? Or is this a...
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And if the municipality has a public consumption ordinance or bylaw, that civil fine up to $300 should always be added to the ticket as well. So my question is, what is the civil marijuana ticket as it stands right now, and would this change the fee associated with a 21D violation?
Actually, the fine schedule we're looking at is the 25, 50, and 100. That's the section that aligns itself with the alcohol. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what was provided to you by the manager's office. I'm not sure what you're reading from, but what I'm suggesting is mirror what we do with alcohol. So I don't know what other piece Mr. Clark gave you there. I have sent him a ton of stuff, and unfortunately, Mr. Clark's office is getting things that sometimes contradict themselves, so I'm just not sure which one he passed forward.
I can make you a copy of it later if you want to see it. Just
No.
my concern is, how does this change what you're doing now, and what changes in the future? Like, will there be is the fine schedule changing from what you do now? Like right now, when you encounter somebody and you write a 21D violation, is it just $25 as specified in the A, B, and C?
There will be two
Right.
pieces to this. What you're talking about is possession of under an ounce. That means you have it in your pocket.
Okay.
What I'm talking about is ingestion. Just like,
Oh, okay.
they've said, listen, if you have that note, and maybe tomorrow, Counselor, the folks at the Board of Health and the state decide, hey, this is what the note looks like. It goes out to every physician's office. I don't know. So if they do that, then that person with the note can possess it. So that throws the whole piece about it's in your pocket, possessing it, that's gone.
Okay.
Still, even if they do that, even if they say, just like alcohol, yes, it's legal, you can go to the store and buy it, and they put a store in the corner, you still won't be able to ingest it. You won't be able to sit there
Right.
and have brownies in your pocket and sit there before, whatever you're going to. I don't want to, say school and church and this and that, but those are the things that come to mind. It's what comes to my mind when I get a call from, the principal over at one of the schools, and hey, Dan, they're doing this every morning. Can you do something about it? They got a note from their doctor, and a piece that a lot of folks aren't familiar with this is it's not just you getting the note. Everybody has a proxy. Everybody has an assistant. So if Mr. Smith is so ill that he has to take marijuana and he has 160 joints on him, Mr. Jones can stand there with him and hold on to it for him because he needs help doing this. To me, that just screams, and it doesn't say anything here about, how much help they need or...
I agree that there's a lot of detail that hasn't been worked out at
There's
the
so many
state level.
questions. I wish I could give you better answers. I hate doing this to the council. I like being able to give you something specific, so I went to everything I could. I learned what I could. The moratorium, please consider it, and this, I think, would at least help with the ingestion on the street,
Okay.
not just the possession.
So this is a separate penalty specific for ingestion that is optionally applied on top of a possession fine?
At this point, again, there are parts that haven't been ironed out, but if you have that note, if a doctor feels like scribbling on the back of a notepad and say, here, Joe, you can have marijuana, as far as I know, they can have a 3-month supply. That is the law in Massachusetts as it stands right now. So forget the 21D for possession, if they have that note.
Right.
This would be if they in fact have that note, but they're standing out there using it.
Which brings me to my other concern about identification. I know that you mentioned now that there is a state ID card that is appropriate for police use, but as far as I know, people don't get a little green sticker on it if they're entitled to have medical marijuana. So
No, but I think if you're using medication, you're depending on a doctor's note, and it says that Joe Smith has the right to have this medication, as with any narcotic or something. I'd like to know who you are if you just have that in your possession.
Right.
And if the town doesn't want to, I respect that, I do. But I think it's important.
Well, I know it's a late meeting and everybody wants to go home, so thank you for your time, everybody.
And I'll be happy to discuss it with you at length, Council.
I just like to know specifically what laws do when we vote on them, and that's...
What I'm doing is trying to keep people from standing on the corner and using marijuana.
Yeah, I think
appreciate that. And
to that point, Chief, in the material that was distributed, it says that it's basically illegal to smoke marijuana in a public place. And it says if the municipality has a public consumption ordinance or bylaw, which is basically what is being sought tonight, that a civil fine should be added to the ticket as well. So basically, I think a police officer, if someone's smoking on the corner right now, has the ability to go up, and if there's no doctor's note, if there's no evidence of them, that you would have the ability to enforce the law as it stands now without a doctor's note. If we put this into place, we can then issue the civil citation through the 21D, unless, again, they have the doctor's note. And then the idea is we'll come back with a moratorium and some kind of process where we can wait until these agencies get done what they're supposed to get done. So the request here is to give the officers the discretion in the bylaws to actually be able to enforce that, as opposed to strictly having to go to court to enforce the law itself.
But my concern with identification, if it's illegal to smoke marijuana in public, whether or not you are entitled and have a note from a doctor,
With
then...
or without, right? With or without.
Yeah, with or without identification.
With or without a doctor's note.
With or without a doctor's note.
If you are in public and you are ingesting, smoking or ingesting,
That's unacceptable.
the police officer with this bylaw has the right to issue a 21D, 25, 50, 100.
Yes.
Done.
That's what I'm asking.
So why is there language about identification?
I apologize, Mr.
So why is there language about identification? Because it seems to imply that if you have the note, then you don't need to respect the bylaw. I mean, I know that the state law says that it's illegal to use marijuana in public whether or not, but I think the bylaw language as it stands now is confusing because of the reference to identification.
Part of that, to tell you the truth, is borrowed from the alcohol piece. That if, in fact, you can identify yourself drinking in public, you can't be arrested. And I think it makes sense with this. When I don't want to arrest you, I want you to stop and you're going to get a ticket. And it's the same thing with alcohol. If you're standing on, somebody's standing on the street, on the sidewalk drinking a beer, you can't be arrested for that. You can be cited for it if you identify yourself. And that's what I'm thinking here.
So if you can't identify yourself, then you can be arrested for
You
it?
can be arrested for drinking in public if you don't identify yourself.
And that's under the bylaw as opposed to state law?
Yes.
We're going to move on now. That's
And I'll be
no
happy
offense,
to.
but
I
that's
hope
enough.
somebody clarifies it for all of us very soon.
I'd love
really
a flow chart
This is
of
only
what
the
happens
excuse
in
me.
what...
This
you
is
know.
only the first reading. We have 2 other readings to come, and we've really gone over this as much as possible. The dialogue goes in subcommittee, not up here. So I'm going to move on now. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counsel McDonald?
Yes.
Counsel Moriarty?
Yes.
Counsel Nicola?
Yes.
Counsel Peliquin?
Abstain.
Counsel Regis?
Yes.
Counsel Vandal?
Yes.
Counsel Clements?
Yes.
Counsel Langevin?
Yes.
Counsel Marcucci?
Yes.
8 yes, 1 abstain.
Agenda item number 11, vote to appropriate $30,000 from free cash to provide training and instructor costs in the use of rifles, ammunition, and purchase of vests capable of stopping a rifle bullet.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on this? Okay.
Yeah.
Counselor, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I mean, in light of what we just voted two questions ago, how is this affecting us money-wise, and how do we know we really need these vests? We haven't audit yet. Oh, sorry, that was a little weird. Let me just go back to the first question. How's this going to affect us money-wise? Sorry, you're late. It's late.
It's got nothing to
Heavens
do
to-
with late, okay? It's got to
It
do
is
with
what it is.
flippancy. Let's, if you have a question, just ask it.
That was the only one.
The question is, currently free cash is $1,059,000 and some change. Obviously, with the vote earlier, we've allocated $40,000 of that. This will put us below $1 million. In the budget plan that we have presented, we usually allocate $1 million towards next year's budget from free cash. So we will not be able to allocate that full amount. We will allocate the amount minus whatever the difference is.
Is that prudent, or should we be waiting on this and to allocate it down the road when we have more money?
Well,
or we see what happens
that's
tax-wise?
On this issue, I guess I did participate in not participate, but observe the training. And it is a violent world in which we live. And I think that it is imperative that we give law enforcement personnel the tools they need in which to deal with the potential threats that they would face. And I think that this material, this training, and the additional bulletproof vests is very, very critical to accomplish. So from administration standpoint, I have no hesitation in putting this forward. I think this is an absolute necessity.
Thank you.
Anybody else on this issue? Councilor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I'm in agreement with the manager. As I understand it, we've acquired some new weaponry from the federal government in terms of M16 or AR-15. I spent 21 years in the Air Force, and we get training on that every year. This is initial skills training. I think if you go back to the issues that were raised several months ago, I think this is us addressing that issue. I don't need the audit to say that we need this training because it's obvious from the fact that it's new equipment. It's prudent upon us to do that for them and kind of meet everybody halfway, including the chief, and I think this goes a long way to addressing part of that as well. So I look at it independently. I think this is a good use of the money because it is a violent world, just like our superintendent said, and we saw the events in Connecticut, and we need to do everything we can to protect our people. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Regis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, and I'm not going to propose adding this to the motion. However, I would ask respectfully that if we are able to actually get a reimbursement from the federal or the state from our Bulletproof Vest grant program, that any additional funds that are left over not be spent and flow back to the reserves at the end of the year. Just respectfully, if I could ask that that happen. Thank you.
We will do everything we can, and just to perhaps ease the council's minds who weren't there about the need for this, over the last year we've had several incidents. We had one where a young man had a shotgun in a car. He was wearing a bulletproof vest. I can only guess what he was trying to do. Less than 3 months ago, we stopped a pickup truck. A young man had an AR-15 with 600 rounds loaded in magazines. We took 2 guns off the street within the last 3 weeks. It's sad to say, but this stuff is hitting every community. I think this is paramount for the officers' safety. And the reason the other vest, Counselor, is all the officers do have vests, and we certainly will, we are looking at whether or not we can do anything further. The reason for this vest is actually an additional one that you put on, because there's a very basic premise in law enforcement that you always try to have a bulletproof vest that will stop the munitions that you're carrying, because when you think about it, there's always one gun on a call. It's the one you have on you. So you at least want to be able to stop that. So these are actually additional vests that would be purchased in times of extreme need to be able to put on above and beyond what the officers have.
Councilor Moriarty.
Just wanted to note that for me anyways, we've seen what's happened in Newtown, everywhere else, and certainly the things that the chief has referenced. So I think there's a certain opportunity cost of opportunity rather. Hindsight is 20/20 for sure, and we certainly don't want to have to look back at some point saying we're trying to pinch pennies and have something happen, and for any sort of flippant comments, I think is inappropriate. Thank you.
Anybody else? Could I have a roll call, please?
Council Moriarty?
Yes.
Council Nicola?
Yes.
Council Peliquin?
Yes.
Council Regis?
Yes.
Council Vandal?
Yes.
Council Clements?
Yes.
Council Langevin?
Yes.
Council Marcucci?
Yes.
Council McDonald?
Yes.
9 yes.
Thank you, Council.
Agenda item number 12. Vote to enter into contract for mutual aid between the Town of Southbridge and Connecticut municipalities as it relates to fire services.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Anybody wish to talk about this ad nauseum? No? Could we hear from the chief, please?
Good evening. I apologize that it's late and I'm near the end. This agreement that we're looking for is a mutual aid agreement with the town of Thompson, Connecticut. They comprise 5 different fire districts in the town of Thompson. So if you'll notice, each one of their fire chiefs will be signing this agreement. But here in the state of Massachusetts, you guys are the governing body, so you'll need to make that decision on whether we want to enter a mutual aid agreement. In today's fire service world, we can't do it alone. We rely very heavily on mutual aid. In fact, I'm sure you've read the weekly minutes that we provide. We've got mutual aid a number of times to help other communities. Someday we're going to be looking for that same help, so this would certainly be a great opportunity for us to engage with those communities just to the south of us that border us, and I think this is a great opportunity.
If there's no questions, comments on this, then we're going to move on the vote. Could we have a roll call, please?
Council Nicola?
Yes.
Council Peliquin?
Yes.
Council Regis?
Yes.
Council Vandal?
Yes.
Council Clements?
Yes.
Council Langevin?
Yes.
Council Marcucci?
Yes.
Council McDonald?
Yes.
Council Moriarty?
Yes.
9 yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you,
Sorry
Counsel.
to hold you up so long. Thank you. Agenda item number 13, vote to approve the snow and ice operations agreement between the Town of Southbridge and Christopher Malinowski for the four-wheel drive pickup truck at the rate of $73 per hour.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Council Peliquin?
Yes.
Council Regis?
Yes.
Council Vandal?
Yes.
Council Clements?
Yes.
Council Langevin?
Yes.
Council Marcucci?
Yes.
Council McDonald?
Yes.
Council Moriarty?
Yes.
Council Nicola?
Yes.
9 yes.
Thank you. Agenda item number 15 is Councilors Forum. Councilor Marcucci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really quick. Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark, in your weekly report, DPW, which is actually the second to the last page, I noticed there were a lot of water turnoffs, 6 to be exact. Mr. Clark, are those, the water turnoff, are these residential or are they owned by the town or both? And were the pipes turned off because they froze and burst, or was it unpaid water bill, or a combination of all three? It's the second to the last page in the reports, the weekly report
Okay, that
to
wasn't
town
under
council.
my report. That was under the DPW report?
Yeah, here, Kathy. Kathy.
Yeah, you got it.
To be honest, I'm going to have to, I'll have to check on this to see what
Okay.
the basis was for that. That's a different one. I have a different one.
No, this doesn't look like the same.
Madam Chair, just rip that page out.
February 5th, North Street, Hamilton Street, Chester Street. This is due first papers. Okay, with it, is it on a...
129.
No, wrong one. No, he's got the wrong, he's just...
I have an older version.
He's got the old...
I'll have to, can
Yeah,
I look at it and get back?
just take that, Mr. Clark. Or
Okay.
Kathy, just rip
Want
that
to keep
page out.
this?
You can just
Thank
rip that page out,
Thank
that'll be
you.
fine.
And it's February.
Yep,
Okay.
Okay?
thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all I have this evening, thank you.
Okay. Councilor Pelican.
So about a month before I was elected to the council, maybe 2 months. I'm not sure exactly the time frame. The council voted to hire attorney Mike Scott from the law firm Nutter, McLennan and Fish to renegotiate the landfill contract, and I was wondering if we could have an update as to where you are on those endeavors.
Well, number one, it's not to renegotiate the landfill contract, but to make different corrections in it. We actually have a meeting tomorrow, not corrections, to make additional changes to it. We have a meeting tomorrow in which hopefully we will have some of the preliminaries worked on and finalized, and then I will bring that back to council. So I do have material that will be coming to council for its consideration fairly shortly. So I will submit that in the next week or so, probably.
So will the council be voting on these changes
Yes.
at some point soon?
Yes.
Will this be an executive session issue, or will it be open? Will public be able to see the changes?
The intent is to do it in open.
Okay, okay. Because I know that people have been asking questions as time goes on, and I said that I would try to follow up and see where we are and what these changes would be, because there's a lot of speculation surrounding landfill issues, and I know that this is an area that the public has a lot of interest in. So.
Okay.
Is that it?
Oh, one other thing. Given the bylaw change, I know that you don't want to submit these bylaw changes to the newspaper because of the expense, but I was wondering if we could have a copy of it posted by the town clerk. I know that there's language in our bylaws that says there's no penalty if we don't do this, but there's also no cost to the town, and it would allow people to be able to see the text of what we're debating. And could we comply with our own bylaw in this way, even though there's no penalty if we don't?
I don't know if I caught the first part of that. I'm happy to put it on the town's website, and if we don't have to put it in the paper, no offense
Right.
to newspapers, but instead of incurring costs, we could put it on the website and
That's
accomplish the same.
Exactly
Is
what I
that-
was, yes.
Sure, I
yes.
think we could do that.
I think the bylaw specifies the website and the bulletin board at the clerk's office. So if those two things don't cost the town any money, or some negligible amount of money, I would love for that to happen. Thank you. And that's it for me, Madam Chair.
Okay. Councilor Vandal.
I just want to thank the DPW and everybody that had any part in keeping the town clean. The town is really, really nice. They did a very good job, and I just want to acknowledge everybody that had something to do with it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I want to reiterate that as well. Everybody, all the town employees did a great job with the weather. The only other thing I would like to add, Madam Chair, is that I did receive several calls over the last couple of weeks in regard to a Friday Conversation article that was in the paper explaining that the town was possibly considering taking money that was designated for restoration of the tornado-affected areas and directing it to downtown. Like I said, I've had several phone calls. Most of that were people who were irate saying that money's designated for the tornado area and should stay targeted with it, and didn't feel it was appropriate that be promised without basically going through the council or...
We can clarify that for you right now, Counselor. I'm going to have the manager tell you what he told me and I've told citizens. Would
Yeah,
you
we
please?
actually appreciate the opportunity. We have had several inquiries ourselves. Mr. Daly put in for a $50,000 tree grant. In that $50,000 tree grant, it says that the trees will be first and foremost offered to all of the impacted properties from the tornado. If and when all those properties are addressed, if there are sufficient funds remaining, then the town has the option of using them in a public shade tree area, which is our downtown. So what Mr. Daly has done is he has sent letters to every impacted residence and offered public shade trees. And I make the differential between public and private because we can't put these trees on people's backyards. So he has received a listing of everybody that is desirable of a tree, and he will meet that need as part of that grant. And then as not a backup, but using the supplemental funds as included in that grant and provided for in that grant, he will do the public shade trees downtown. So that was the way that grant was structured, and we have complied with that grant. The article, unfortunately, the way the gentleman portrayed it, kind of, he took things a little bit out of context and said, like, that was the first priority, and that really wasn't the case. So I do appreciate the opportunity to kind of set the record straight, because that was really the intent, is what I just laid out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Manager, thank you, Madam Chair. That makes perfect sense to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilor Moriarty.
Just in an effort as far as trying to find good things and praising them, kind of piggybacking a little bit in that, considering the length and the intensity of the storm, for the amount of time and hours that our DPW workers and the subcontractors for the plows had to spend endlessly going over the same roads, because we're picking up 3 to 5 inches an hour at some points. Just a big thanks and applause for them, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Langevin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quickly, due to time constraints, again, as you said and numerous other people, but they do need to hear this. Our DPW and our police and fire, especially our DPW, they work extremely hard, and being out in other communities, we are leaps and bounds way ahead of other communities, and I personally want to thank them for all the many, many, many hours of non-sleep, hard work, and kudos to the whole staff there. And on a public safety end, just, we always pump on people about shoveling their sidewalks. I got to reach out to the people that have a hydrant in front of their house. Please help for public safety reasons, shovel out your fire hydrant in front of you. And really, I would like to propose this question to the town manager. Maybe they could reach out to the sheriff's department and see if they can come and help shovel out some other fire hydrants, because we do have pending snow again coming up, and help them do their jobs. And that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Regis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to echo everyone's comments about DPW and police and fire regarding the storm. Also, it's important to note that the storm may be over, but I can probably almost guarantee that DPW will be out probably for several nights picking up snow. So it's not over for them. Just because the snow has stopped, it's not over. And I, like the others, appreciate all of their efforts. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Clements?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I echo everyone's thoughts on the cleanup efforts. I was out of town when I came back. It was nice to know that I could actually get to my driveway. But I also want to applaud not just the DPW and the fire and all those, but the private contractors that we continually add to our roster list here, because without that extra effort, there's no way our staff could get it all done. So it's nice to know that we have community members who are willing to get out there and spend a lot of time also cleaning our streets. And I implore the public to pay attention. We have parking moratoriums, and I know it's very difficult at this time, but when you've got 2 cars parked, one on each side, and our police can't, unfortunately, ticket and tow everybody who's doing this, it makes it dangerous for other people to try to get around a corner. So please be mindful of that when you are parking and disobeying the rules on that one. I've seen that happen, unfortunately, today myself. So, and avoid a ticket and a towing. Also, I just want to reach out to Evelyn Petrelli. She's been under the weather a bit, as I was informed while I was away. And best to you, Evelyn. And I'm sure you'll be back up here at every meeting, just like usual, very soon. So, good luck with your recovery. And that's it. Next meeting?
The next meeting is?
Monday, February 25th, 7 p.m. here in Council Chambers.
This meeting is adjourned. All in favor? Have a great night, everybody.